Okay, so now we're going to learn how it is that, or what it would look like for you to think like Aristotle. And of course, you're using intellectual empathy, right, during this task to reason from the extremes. Why? Because in reasoning from the extremes of deficit and excess, we are trying to figure out what is the balance between those extremes that would result in a balance, the golden mean or moral virtue. That is, in reasoning to the extremes, we will be able to realize our soul's powers to act according to reason and hence be virtuous, because that's supposedly what we're designed to do. So we have to use intellectual empathy to make sure that we're really trying to employ this technique in the way that an Aristotelian, a virtue ethicist, might. So reasoning from the extremes is itself a virtue ethics strategy for trying to decide what is the morally correct or morally appropriate behavior in a given context. So what I did is I constructed this question, and it took me a couple minutes because I needed to really kind of make it very focused. So I'm using, again, a different example. Yes, we're talking about police officers in this example. Just remember that you have a different context. You're talking about a police officer in a different situation. I'm using another situation to show you kind of what you're doing. So I constructed this question: what might it look like for an off-duty police officer dressed in civilian clothes but armed to reflect cowardice while a bank crowded with customers is being robbed? And I'm going to put at gunpoint by several gunmen. Of course, your context is, what would it look like for Derek Chauvin? What would have looked like? So I'm talking about possible futures. In your discussion, you're talking about something that has already passed. So you're trying to make a moral judgment about the past. What would it have looked like for Derek Chauvin to have shown assertiveness, a moral virtue, we're stipulating, in the context of his interaction with George Floyd? So that one is more specific. Your question, your discussion is more specific. It's about specific people in the past. This one's a little bit more general, but you still do the same kinds of moves. So it would be good for you to formulate the precise question that you're answering when you are talking about a given trait. So let's say you're going to start off with weakness. Well, you're going to want to formulate your question based on what I've said, and maybe you can use a question I've already asked, to pinpoint what it is your discussion is going to be talking about. And of course, your first discussion is going to talk about weakness and what would it look like for Derek Chauvin to have shown that. So I might have already given you the question, and you can just copy it, but also think critically about it. Is it precise enough? Maybe you're more informed. Maybe you can include a detail or two. All right. So now, what you do at this point is you incorporate your definition, not up here. You're not focused on this part. You're focused on incorporating the definition that you have come up with, made your own through documented research, into answering a particular question that gets you to reason from an extreme. So first you're thinking through an extreme. This is an extreme of deficit when we're talking about cowardice. The first one you will focus on is weakness or passiveness and the definition that you come up with. So as you can see, let's see what the requirements are here. Make sure your response shows attention to step 1 of the video for this task. That's this video. Construct a paragraph of at least 3 sentences. So unlike the definition, so like with the definition for the research, you had a formatted list and then you had like a sentence or two. For this part, it's discussion, so it needs to be in a paragraph form. Notice that I say at least 3 sentences. That's the bare minimum. I'm thinking a good answer will have 5 to 6 sentences. Again, I remind you for this, when you're focusing on weakness, and then later when I tell you to focus on aggression, and later when I tell you to focus on assertiveness, it says it'll all have the same basic bullets. So we're going over this item and the next 2 items in this video. Use transitional, introductory, I need to fix that typo, I will have done that by the time you get to this, phrases to build coherence from one sentence to the next. Write-up should have good internal flow or logic. I need to fix that, so I'll say your write-up. Try to avoid comma splices, run-on, and sentence fragments. Keep in mind that in a paragraph of 3 sentences, you really shouldn't have more than 1 or 2 little typos. Maybe one of these will be okay. I won't count off. I'll comment on it. But if you have something in every sentence, that's when I begin to, take off points. Or if I see 3 run-ons, in a paragraph, or 2 run-ons, and that's when I begin to take off points. If you had 1 run-on and maybe 1 issue with syntax and maybe 1 period, that is a lot for 3 sentences. So yeah, I might take off. But if you just have a couple minor things, then no, or 1 minor thing and 1 major thing, then no, I'm not going to take off points because I understand that. Now, let's go back to a demonstration of what we're doing here. So at this point, I am working with this definition that I've come up with, that I've made my own, to answer this question. So I might start off by saying something like, a police officer, and I need to unbold that. Make sure you guys unbold stuff. I've had people turn in paragraphs that are completely in bold, and that's just not cool. It's hard for me to read. There we go. So a police officer in this scenario, and you have to use your imagination a little bit. If you would like to do some research and learn more about, especially when you're talking about Derek Chauvin and the use of his knee, you are welcome to do research on that. Or if you want to do a little bit of research on appropriate forms of constraint used by police officers, that's fine, but make sure that you cite your sources. Make sure that you do not plagiarize. Earlier in this Blackboard Created Review, I gave you a link to a very quick read, like it's almost bullet points or video, on 8 kinds of plagiarism. So if you do that, then make sure that you quote stuff that you lift verbatim, that you have internal citations for things that you paraphrase, and that you include a list of works cited. Even if you don't quote, you still have to give me a list of works paraphrased. You can get a 0 for this entire assignment. You can even get an F for the class if you're not careful. So it's always better to over document, use too much internal citations. It never hurts to overdo that. It always hurts to underdo that. So a police officer in this scenario, I'm just going to go ahead and use my imagination and say, might show cowardice by hiding from the gunman. Okay, that's okay, but that's 1. It's only 1 sentence, and I need at least 3. It's not very persuasive. So when you're trying to explain how someone might reflect a character trait, whether it's a vice, an extreme, or a mean, a virtue, you have to elaborate, you have to explain, you have to be compelling. You really have to try to convince me by getting into the discussion. So this is an okay beginning, but it's not very compelling. And what's lacking is something that I must see. You must incorporate the definition. Now, what will not be acceptable is you simply saying, here's the definition I'm using for cowardice. I already have your definition for cowardice. What I want you to do is embed phrases from the definition into your discussion. So here I have a police officer in this scenario might show cowardice by hiding from the gunman. So now I'm thinking, how can I embed words in either this sentence or a new sentence from my definition to flesh out that what I'm discussing here in terms of someone not showing cowardice is supported by a definition that I have constructed. So I have can be expressed by lack of bravery or courage when it comes to things like danger, difficulty, opposition, or pain, may coincide with a lack of firmness or purpose. So it doesn't really seem like I can use the concepts of firmness and purpose, nor lacking them with respect to what I've just written. But maybe I can talk about a lack of bravery or courage when it comes to things like danger, difficulty, or opposition. So I might say, this action would show, and here I would want you to use quotation marks from your definition that you made your own. Show a lack of courage when it comes to the danger of being confronted with armed criminals. Oh my goodness. Okay. Being confronted with armed criminals. Let's fix that. All right. So what I'm also going to want you to do to make it really visual, we're going to visualize that you're meeting the requirements, is I want you to also highlight where you are embedding in a meaningful way components of your researched definition. So I have a police officer in this scenario might show cowardice by hiding from the gunman. This action, so now I'm going to explain why would it show cowardice. So I'm going to elaborate on that. To elaborate on that, when you're doing that, you want to go to your definition, okay? Then you want to find the parts of your definition that can best help you elaborate on that specific claim. We saw that this part of the definition wasn't going to be useful in a meaningful, compelling way with respect to the claim made in the first sentence. But we could use elements of the first part of this definition in a compelling and meaningful way. So those are standards to keep in mind when you are making use of, embedding, showing explicitly how your definition can be used to support a claim, to elaborate on something. So of course, the claim is that it is possible for a policeman to show cowardice in the situation, and the possibility that you are showing is that he might hide. But then you have to elaborate on that using meaningful, compelling components of your informed definition. And I show that visually with quotation marks and highlight this action. And in fact, I would like for you to go ahead and highlight the word that names the fundamental and powerful concept that you're using to discuss for this part of the discussion. So a police officer in this scenario might show cowardice by hiding from the gunman. This action would show, notice this. Oh, well, I'll make general comments later. So a lack of courage when it comes to the danger of being confronted with armed criminals. Okay, so we might elaborate on that a little bit more. So then I have two sentences here. So can I somehow elaborate on what I say here without just simply, saying this might show, because I could say, this might show that he's not willing to face a difficult situation. But yeah, that would be okay. But can I say something more compelling? Yes. So now I can elaborate on the second statement. So I can say a police officer is trained to work in a variety of situations, including those that are considered dangerous. So I want to show that I'm using that term again in my definition. Now, let me go ahead and highlight that. Do you see how I'm expanding on using the definition and elements of the definition? So you do not, in your discussion piece, have to use all elements of your definition that you created. While the definition that you create does have to make use of elements from each of the definitions that you have researched and presented, when it comes to this part, you do not have to use all elements of the definition that you have created. So, but you do have to use at least 2 or 3 elements. So my discussion shows 2 or 3 elements of a definition. I have lack of courage and then danger. So I have used 2 elements of a definition that I cited that is in my informed definition. So a police officer is trained to work in a variety of situations, including those that are considered dangerous. This is okay. This is the minimum, but now I want to be more compelling, right? So now what I could do is I could link back this. Let me think about this some more. So I actually paused the video when I wanted to construct the third sentence. And so I guess what I'm doing right now is I'm role modeling to you intellectual humility and intellectual perseverance. Guys, I don't know. I'm not sure what would make this more compelling right now. I just feel like I could say more to make this more compelling, more convincing, more persuasive. But right now I'm not sure what that is. And so I need to stop and I need to focus and I need to think. So I'm role modeling to you intellectual perseverance. So I'm going to pause the video so that I can work through this challenging cognitive task. Okay, so I've thought about this a little bit more and I'm thinking I might want to say something like, clearly, an officer who was properly trained should be able to I'm going to say work through any fears that he might have, despite the possibility of getting shot by an armed criminal. Now notice fears here. So fears ties to what? Of course, you can have fear in a dangerous situation, and for a lot of people, or someone might say, it's fear that makes someone a coward. So this actually allows me to create great coherence. Fears ties both to being a dangerous situation and the emotion that a coward might have. But the idea isn't the idea. I might be thinking, well, in my opinion, I mean, maybe I'm not a professional police officer, but aren't police supposed to be trained on how to deal with those emotions in dangerous situations? So clearly an officer who is properly trained should be able to work through any fears that he might have despite the possibility of getting shot by an armed criminal. That looks pretty good. So I might have here, to make it even more compelling, tie it back up to what? The action. Notice that I'm not speaking, I haven't mentioned anything about the example, hiding from the gunman. And there's others, you know. The police officer might try to run away, to escape, and and not do anything about it and just continue with his daily life. That would be both passive and he would be both a coward and passive in that sense then. Okay, so here I might tie it up nicely, add coherence by going back to this possible act of hiding. So then I can say hiding when trained to handle this kind of situation would show that he is giving into an emotion or psychological state, fear, that he is trained to overcome. Giving into this fear of the dangerous situation by hiding is what leads me to classify that action, or to classify him in that action classify his action as one of cowardice. Okay, so let's take a look at this. It says a police officer in this scenario might show cowardice by hiding from the gunman. The action would show a lack of courage when it comes to the danger of being confronted with armed criminals. A police officer is trained to work in a variety of situations, including those that are considered dangerous. So we name the word, we highlight it to show the concept that we're using. This concept is the focus. We use it in a fundamental and powerful way to organize the entire discussion. Make sure you do not give track. Stay on topic. Everything that you should say here, that you say in your paragraph, should somehow be stemming through your definition or understanding of what it means for some word that you've highlighted as the fundamental concept that you're using, a character trait. Here I give an action, an example. Now, guys, I realize that in this example, you might disagree with what I said, because you might raise an objection and say, well, maybe he's hiding so that he can call for backup or text for backup. And that's cool. That's possible. And you could say that, so then maybe you might say, well, he's not being a coward in that situation. He's actually being, courageous or smart and intelligent, and that's fine. We can disagree about when and if somebody's showing a trait. The point of this activity is to show that you can construct a well-researched, documented, informed definition, and then to show that you can use it and embed elements of that definition into a discussion. So it's more about the critical thinking that I want to see than whether or not we agree on whether someone is reflecting a character trait in a given situation. I just want to see that you can make the intellectual moves such that it looks like you're thinking like Aristotle through something, okay? So keep that in mind. Okay, so a police officer, so I've got that part. So you can see what I've done here. And then I'm expanding. I'm making more compelling claims. Clearly, an officer who is properly trained should be able to work through any fears. Again, so this is elaborating on, it's shedding light on. Fears, like I said, goes back to dangerous and cowardice. So if you wanted to, you could then bold other words that you think connect to quoted elements of your definition. I might even give you extra credit if you do that well. If you don't do it well, I won't take off. But fears shows that I'm elaborating and I'm expanding on something that I've quoted from my definition. So fears that he might have despite the possibility of getting shot by an armed criminal. Hiding when trained to handle this kind of situation would show that he's giving into an emotion or psychological state. I'm going to go ahead and bold these words too. Why? Because they are broader terms, they are categories for what? Fear, right? So fear is an emotion or psychological state that ties back to what? Dealing with dangerous situations and lacking courage. So then I'm going to do this again. That he is trained to overcome. Giving into this fear of a dangerous, there's the key term again, so let's highlight that. Situation by hiding is what leads me to classify his action, or we could say this possible action, because we're talking about, what ifs or possible future actions, this possible action as one of what? Cowardice. And I'm going to put that in quotation marks because, again, I'm highlighting, emphasizing, iterating visually. Hey, Dr. C. Hey, wait a minute. I don't need to do that. That's the word that's being defined, not the definition. There we go. Okay, so you can make your paragraph in your discussion more coherent by trying to use uniform language, by the way. Not all the time, not necessarily 100%, but notice that I do have some uniform language. So I say cowardice up here in opening for the topic of this paragraph, and then I tie it with a bow down here by naming the concept that I've been using and tying it to other points that I've made here in the last sentence. I have lack of courage. I don't use that word again. I probably could if I wanted to level up on my response. I could find a way to incorporate courage back into my discussion and relate it to this. But I show that danger, you see danger is here, so I'm highlighting it again, adding coherence, fluidity. And then here, maybe I could have done these in yellow, but I'm only putting in yellow stuff that I have with respect to the definition and the term defined. But like I said, it would be cool if you bold words that themselves link to elements of the definition. One final point I want to make is that this is just an example, okay? So I am not saying that you are going to be able to make all these specific moves or word things exactly like this when you do your paragraph. But there are basic things I will be looking for. A sentence that names the fundamental and powerful, that names the trait that you will be discussing, right? So maybe an opening sentence of some sort. So you're going to be talking about for this item in this Blackboard created review, what would it look like? What would it have looked like? Because you're talking about past tense for Derek Chauvin to show weakness when he was trying to execute. You might have to do research for this. His arrest of Derek Floyd, or to question Derek Floyd. So what was it he was trying to do, and what would it have looked like for him to be weak in interacting with George Floyd? You cannot evade this question. You can't say, well, there was no opportunity. You have to entertain the possibility, okay? So let's assume, in fact, let's go ahead for this assignment and assume that Derek Floyd was resisting arrest. Let's just say that he was, okay? We're going to stipulate that for this writing activity. Let's assume he was. Then what would it have looked like for Derek Chauvin to have shown weakness in trying to arrest Derek Floyd, assuming Derek Floyd was trying to resist arrest, assuming that Derek Floyd needed to arrest and was justified in trying to arrest him? So I'm not saying that actually was the case, but for the purpose of showing me that you can think like Aristotle and reason through the extremes through defined terms, that's what we're going to assume. That Derek Floyd was resisting arrest, and that it was appropriate for Derek Floyd to try to arrest him. So what would it have looked like for him, Derek Floyd, to show weakness when trying to arrest Derek Floyd, while he was trying to resist arrest? All right. So if you can find a better way to formulate that, that would be fine. Or we could even say, what would it have looked like for Derek Chauvin to have shown weakness while trying to subdue or restrain Derek Floyd, assuming Derek Floyd was trying to resist arrest? You could use that as your organizing question. So then you could say something like, Derek Floyd might have shown weakness, blah, 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 in the scenario by what, or not doing what, or so you might say in terms of what he's doing or not doing. So then make sure you incorporate that word weakness in here, right, by giving me an example of how he might have shown weakness with respect to the question I've been trying to help you formulate in the last few minutes of this lecture. And then, of course, you're going to try to shed light on that and incorporate, expand on, elaborate, right, what you say in the first sentence by drawing from at least two elements of your definition and expanding on that. I really like the idea of tying it up with a bow here, finding a way to name the concept again here so that you're kind of wrapping up the paragraph and the point of the paragraph in a way, or kind of connecting what you discussed later in the paragraph to what you first said by bringing in the name of the trait again here. Okay, so this video will be used for the other discussion pieces as well. Except for the other discussion pieces, you are going to be, of course, talking about different traits when it comes to Derek Chauvin. You will be talking about aggression, okay, showing aggression, so the trait of aggressiveness, and then you'll be talking about, assertiveness or being assertive. The other thing that I want to say is that you can get bonus points if you can find a way to embed terms here into your discussion. So if I'm here talking about cowardice, one thing I could do to get bonus points is to find a way to incorporate a sentence or two in a compelling, fluid way, in a coherent way, where I might say something about cowardice. I could add a sentence either after the first or maybe even at the end, to show that I understand how this fits in with the table that we looked at with respect to Aristotle. So I could construct a sentence that says something about cowardice being a vice. Well, what kind of a vice is it? Make a sentence. Cowardice is a vice, and then a separate sentence. Well, what does the table tell you the vice is? And so look at the table for information and use quotation marks so that you don't plagiarize. If you do that, you could get bonus points. So for cowardice in my example, I could have added something like that. I don't want to construct the sentences for you. But when you are discussing the traits with respect to Derek Chauvin and the question that we have now formulated, you can bring that in. So when you talk about aggression and him showing aggression, you could, of course, add information that aggression is a vice. Well, then tell me, what kind of a vice would it be? And then when you talk about assertiveness, you could make explicit that you're talking about not a vice, but a moral virtue. Well, what else did the table say about moral virtue? What is a moral virtue according to Aristotle in the table that I gave you? So you could get some bonus points in there. It would all be part of the same paragraph. But again, if you include that information and you're showing off, you're showing me that you are making explicit connections to earlier lecture points and key terms from Aristotle, telling me why something is, where cowardice falls, not cowardice, where weakness falls with respect to the table, with respect to vice and what that means, where aggression falls and where assertiveness falls, that could definitely get you some extra points. I would say up to 9 bonus points if you do it well within the respective paragraphs. Keep in mind that, you want to be compelling and you want the ideas for me to be able to follow why you say something after you say something else. I think that's all. So this one video for all 3 paragraphs, again, the general idea is the general intellectual moves that I expect to see you making, and that's it.